Hello everyone, welcome to this session on web development interview questions. Today in this session, we will be going through some of the most asked interview questions related to web development which can be asked to you in your next interview. So let's get started. But before we move on guys, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Intellipaat channel and also click on that bell icon to never miss out on any updates from us. So now let's go ahead and start off with the agenda. Alright guys, so first we'll discuss about some questions related to HTML5. Then we'll move on and discuss about some questions related to CSS3, followed by questions related to WebKits. Once you're done with that, we'll talk about pagination, and after that, we'll be discussing some questions about transitions. Once you're done with that, we'll move on and discuss some questions related to data polling, and then discuss about some questions related to the basics of JavaScript. After that, we'll talk about form submissions in JavaScript, some questions about that. And then finally, some questions about pair programming concepts and jQuery. So guys, this is the agenda for this session. I hope it's clear to you. Now let's move on and start off with the agenda with the questions of HTML5.
So let's begin this top web development interview questions by starting with the first question. It states, what is the difference between SOAP and REST? Well, this is a very important question that is very much asked in all of the web development interviews, so let's check it out. Well, to begin with, there's a lot of differences between SOAP and REST because SOAP is actually a web development protocol while REST is an architectural platform. And then when you have to talk about what languages and what kind of markups it works with, SOAP works well with XML while REST gives you the ability to work with XML, HTML and plain text as well. There's one very important distinction that you do have to mention in this comparison is that SOAP does not have the ability to use REST while REST can completely make use of SOAP. So even though this might not feel like a vital difference, but in its application and in its usage, it is very vital that you actually say it out loud. So make sure to convey these 3 points to the interviewer when you ask this question. Now with this, we can check out the second question. The second question states, what is the use of a namespace in web development? Now, well, a namespace is actually a global object whenever we talk about web development terms, and this object, just like any other object in the world of programming, has the ability to hold on to methods, has the ability to use properties to actually define the object and its characteristics, and in fact, a namespace can also have other objects in them as well. So they hold 3 things: methods, properties and other objects too. So when we talk about why we require namespaces, one of the main reasons is that it will provide very good amount of reusability in terms of code, and we do not have to type out the entire syntax all the time. This will avoid a lot of name conflicts, and more than this, it will add to the ease of use whenever we talk about modularity as well. So with these 3 being the primary role of namespace, it just makes your ability to write code very effective, and eventually if your code is very efficient and you do not have to put in much more effort, you can use the same time to concentrate on the logic as well. So this is a win-win in terms of making use of namespace in web development. Now coming to the next question, it states, what are the newly introduced input types in HTML5? Well, HTML5 has had multiple iterations, multiple revisits, multiple updates from the past couple of years, and then it's growing to be very nice markup language for all of us to work with as well. So whenever we talk about the types that have been introduced newly, there's so many types that have been coming on as per the update versions keep coming out, but then at least take this opportunity to name at least 3 to 4 HTML input types whenever you ask this question. There's so many on your screen, everything from color, date time, local, you have email, you have month, number range and more. So mention 3 to 5 and that should be more than sufficient. Now coming to the next question, it states, what are the form elements that support media content in HTML5? Well, there's actually 5 very important elements in HTML5 whenever we talk about engaging or using any media, be it any audio visual media or images as well. So the 5 main elements are these: audio, video, source, embed and track. So whenever you think about naming these, it will also be a little impressive if you add a sentence to each of these while explaining. For example, you can talk about the audio element on how it helps to import a piece of audio or use a piece of video as well, and then when you talk about source and embed, where you can embed links, and of course even track as well. So make sure to mention 1 or 2 sentences each whenever you're mentioning, so you add a little bit of concreteness to the answer. Now with this we can come to question number 5 that states what is SVG and why is it used? SVG actually stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. It's actually a file, whenever we talk about moving and making use of vector based graphics anywhere over the internet. So the graphical content that is present in these SVG images, right? So they are rendered which is based upon an XML format. So you can make use of PNG, JPG and all of those of course, but then when you make use of SVG, the graphical quality of the content is actually high, the image quality is really high, and it does not play a big impact in terms of website loading or any of those performance metrics that's involved in web development as well. So for one of those reasons, SVG files, SVG images and other vector based graphics are preferred in this field. Now coming to the 6th question, it states what is the use of Canvas in HTML? Well, as the name suggests, Canvas is in fact a piece of Canvas, as it suggests, just like in real life, it's in fact a tag in HTML where it will allow the user to draw anything he or she chooses to. You can draw circles, boxes, images, paths, and a lot more. So Canvas is actually added into HTML5 to make sure that users have this ability to manually go on to create circles, boxes, images, and all of these easily. And of course, it is done by making use of JavaScript. So that is Canvas, and with this we can come to a quick difference that might pop up in case the question about Canvas or SVG is asked. It is what is the difference between Canvas and SVG? Well, an SVG image is actually resolution independent if you talk about it. So you can scale it on multiple devices and it does not have a dependency on the native resolution of the device that it's being viewed from. But then Canvas is a little different. With Canvas, the images are actually resolution dependent. So you have to be careful with that. And in terms of events and event handling, SVG actually supports event handlers while Canvas does not offer any sort of support for event handlers. And then when you think about rendering for large scale applications, well, as you can already think of it, SVG is the format that's actually preferred whenever you have to talk about large scale rendering applications. But then you do not have to make use of SVG always. If the call is for a small scale rendering application, or let's say the images which do not take up a lot of time to create and which do not have a large impact on the surroundings of it, then well, of course, yes, Canvas is the tool. Well, then of course Canvas is used a lot there as well. So this forms to be the basic differences that lie in between Canvas and SVG. Now on to the next. We'll check out the 8th question. The 8th question states, how can page loading time be reduced? Page loading time is one of the very, very important things that can either make or break your website, right? So if someone's on your website and if your page is loading way longer than it's supposed to, that person could be a customer who could drive a lot of sales for you, and he might be uninterested. He or she might be uninterested and the person might leave. So understanding that you have to keep the page loading time to as minimum as possible is important. Now, if we're talking about how we can actually reduce this, there is multiple factors that affect a page loading time. See, I've mentioned about 5 or 6 on your screen, but then you can name about 20-25 factors if you go in depth to a very complex convoluted level where you can understand of how you can reduce the page loading time. But then these are the 5 very important things and some methodologies that you can implement to actually reduce the loading time. See, for example, reduction in the image sizes will actually have a lot of impact, as in images are large size files, right? So they have to be loaded every time the page is refreshed and whatnot. So reduction in that will help. Then if you have any widgets that you feel that are unnecessary, then of course removal of it. Then we can use HTML compression techniques, and when we're talking about lookups as well, the reduction in lookups are going to have a really big impact on the page loading time. And when you think about page caching and making use of minimal redirection, where you're not redirecting the users multiple times across the websites to get everything reloaded up again and again, well, that of course will help in reducing the load time in between the web pages in your website as well. So these are some of the very, very important factors that we talk about to bring down the page loading time drastically. Now with this we can check out the 9th question that states, what is the use of CORS or CORS? Well, CORS is an acronym that stands for Cross Origin Resource Sharing. So it is one of the very simple mechanisms that actually provides the users with the ability to have access for a variety of resources, let's say from one domain to another domain which is outside the current request domain, right? So if there is the current working domain that you have and there is another request domain which is outside the current workspace, then of course this mechanism will act as the binding bridge where resources can be shared across these two domains, without putting much effort out there. So to do this easily, we make use of CORS or cross-origin resource sharing. Well, with this we come to the 10th question that states, what is the difference between local storage and session storage objects? Well, as you can tell, both of these are actually objects, when we talk about web development, and objects have lifetimes, right? So the one thing you have to talk about storage is of course the expiry time. And if you're talking about local storage, there is no expiry set for the objects that are stored here, because there is data present, and the data does not expire. And then when we talk about objects in session storage, well, the object here is actually valid only until one single session, and after the session the object expires, and of course the session object will be recreated again and used again. But then it is very vital that you understand the basic difference between having an object that does not expire versus having an object that does expire for every single session. Now, what happens after expiry, right? So data is actually not deleted whenever we have local storage methodologies in place, because even after closing the window, the data does exist. But then if you're talking about a session storage object, as soon as you close the particular session, particular window, or whatever it is, the object immediately gets deleted because that session is done. This is complementary to the first point. And then of course, if you want the objects to be back up again, you open the website again, or in fact reloading the site again will bring back the objects for that particular session, and it similarly goes on and on. So this is the basic difference that lies between local storage and session storage. Now with this we can come to the 11th question that states, what are some of the new features that are introduced in CSS 3? Well, cascading style sheets has been around for a while, and with every version it gets more impressive than ever. With CSS 3, I think the very most important thing that you have to talk about is how the entire framework is now made more user friendly, more easier to use, yet at the same time very powerful enough. So you will do a small amount of things, and that will have a big amount in terms of styling as well. So there's a lot of new features that were added, but then if you have to talk about the most popular ones, the ones that have made the charts, the ones that are really popularly used among developers, then of course it's the ability to add rounded corners to images or any other parts of the objects as well, then adding animations, having custom layouts and working with that, making use of media queries, and a lot more. So these 4 features wind up on the top of the table whenever we talk about how CSS3 and its new features are playing out in today's market. So make sure to mention at least 3 of these. Now, with this we can come to the next question that states, what is RWD in HTML and CSS? RWD is also called as responsive web design, and in fact it is one of these amazing concepts that is used to create web pages where let's say where we have clients or users across multiple resolutions. So you might have clients who are using the particular website you're designing on their mobile phones, on their iPads, or on their laptops, or let's say even on a very big, let's say a 150-inch projector screen as well. So in that particular case, making sure that your web design is responsive, as the name suggests, where you're not tying up the native resolution and having dependencies with the machine as well. So your website will have the capability of automatically adjusting itself, changing the structure as and when it requires to provide the best possible viewing experience for the user, to make sure that they don't miss out on any data, or that they do not have to scroll a lot from one particular design to another. So it's all about making sure that your website fits all the screens, and RWD is all about that. Now, after understanding this, we need to check out what are some of the types of CSS that are available today. So when we talk about cascading style sheets, the first very important thing that we always discuss is how are we going to implement CSS in our particular design, right? So there are actually 3 types of CSS that are present, in fact, that are very widely used. One's the inline CSS, we have external CSS, and we have embedded CSS. And as the name suggests itself, so whenever we're working with HTML elements, right? So if you add the CSS code in line with the HTML elements, then we call it as inline CSS. And then if we actually have to import a file, an external file which contains all of the CSS programming, which contains all of the CSS data, then we call it as external CSS because we are actually using our HTML to import this particular CSS file, hence the name external CSS. And then we have the embedded CSS. Embedded CSS are added by making use of the style tag that's available in HTML. So using this, we can add all of the required CSS style as per desire and as per requirement as well. So these three are the very important types of CSS that are present, and all three of them are very widely used as well. Now with this, we can check out the 14th question that states, what is the use of a selector in CSS? So whenever we have, let's say, any elements, any inline elements that require styling, a CSS selector is always used there. So it's used with the rule in all of the inline statements. And with this, the most important thing is that it makes it easy for the users to, let's say, find and select HTML elements. It can be on a lot of factors, right? You might have to select HTML elements based on its attributes, based on IDs, based on names, and a variety of other factors as well. So to make sure that you can select all of these easier, as the name suggests, a CSS selector is very much in use. Now, moving on to the 15th question. It states, can you give an example of making use of an ID selector in CSS? Making use of an ID selector is very simple and it is very straightforward as well. So check out the example, on your screen. So we have the paragraph tag where PID is equal to selector example, and here the selector example is actually name of the identification that we provide to that particular point of reference as well. So it's as simple as that. It does not have to be selector example. It can be anything. Just for the sake of this, to denote this example, let's put as selector example. But of course, you can name the ID anything as well. So as you can already tell, so if you have an element that has to point to a target element for any sort of usage, then it is as simple as shown on your screen. So with this understanding, we can check out another question about CSS, which states, what is the use of grouping in CSS3? Grouping, again, all of these are very readable concepts, as you can see. And again, grouping, as the name suggests, is one very important concept where CSS is providing the users with the ability to actually apply one single CSS style elements to multiple HTML entities without having to type it multiple times. So if you have like more than 4 or 5 HTML entities where you need some styling to be added, you do not have to type it 5 times manually or 6 times manually, right? So 5 or 6 is a very small number. If you have a very complex website, you might have thousands of lines of HTML. So, copying it for thousands of lines and styling it manually is not possible and is very inefficient. So what we do is, in terms of grouping, so whenever we group all of the CSS tags, as you can see in that small example shown, you can have that particular styling added to any number of HTML entities that you wanted. So all it takes is one single declaration of that statement, and the styling can be matched to multiple HTML entities. So with this, we can check out another question about selectors, which states, what is the use of a class selector in CSS? So this is a very important question, so make sure to pay attention. Well, a class selector in CSS was actually an entity that is used to select a statement in HTML, modify the style of it, and make sure that you do it for the correct tag at the same time as well. So if there is a requirement of selecting a statement, modifying the style of that particular element in that statement, and making sure that it is on the correct HTML tag, we make use of selectors. And all of these selectors, right? So whenever we talk about class selectors especially, they start with a period, they start with a full stop to begin with as part of the syntax, and then we have the name of the class for that particular selector. For example, you can see on the screen in the below example shown, you can see dot example class, right? So that dot example class indicates that it's a class selector with the name example class, and of course the styling is followed by that, and then we can make use of it later in the particular tags as well. But then it makes it very, very simple and very elegant to use when we do this. So with this, we can come to check out the 18th question that states, what is the use of WebKit in CSS3? If I have to talk about web development, then WebKit has to be a very important aspect of it, because so WebKit is a very, very important concept of CSS3, which will provide the users the ability to have their HTML files and CSS elements rendered easily across a span of browsers, right? So it is not browser dependent, but to make sure that you get this compatibility where you can run the same CSS HTML elements across a variety of browsers, be it Mozilla Firefox, be it Safari, be it it Google Chrome or be it Microsoft Edge or whatever it is. So but then to use these WebKits, we have something called as engines that have to be supported by the browsers. For example, we have an engine called as Gecko for easy use of HTML and CSS in Mozilla. We have Presto for Opera, the other browser, and then we have Edge for the now retired Internet Explorer as well. So when you think about it, these engines form to be very important components that allow the usage of styling and rendering of all of these HTML and CSS elements as well. So with this, we can check out the 19th question that says, what are the use of another type of selectors called as child selectors in CSS? Child selectors, again, you might have guessed it, is actually used to look up a child element in the case of CSS. So what happens is that, let's think about it as an example. So if there is an example where, let's say, where you use the UL tag to create a paragraph, right? So what happens is that the paragraph tag is the parent tag, and then under it, if you've made use of the UL tag, then that becomes the child tag, right? So how can we implement this child parent pattern by making use of CSS, you ask? Well, check out the last line. It is as simple as that. So P2 UL and the font size, the styling that we have given manually is supposed to be 20 pixels, and it just takes one single line, in fact half a line, and it's very simply done, and it's very easily done like this. Now with this, after understanding child selectors, we need to understand that the new feature about how rounded borders can be implemented in CSS3 and how can they be implemented in a very simple way. To make use of the rounded borders, right? So CSS has this border radius property that will allow all the users to make sure that they can make use of elements and give them a very nice looking rounded corner as well. So instead of having sharp, squarey or boxy corners, having rounded corners is always aesthetic. To add this, there are 4 very important attributes of the border radius property that you have to check out for 4 corners, as the name suggests. You'll be rounding the top left border. So you have the ability to separately round out the top left corner, the top right corner, bottom left corner, or the bottom right corner by making use of these attributes that are shown on your screen. So you do not have to round all of them compulsorily at the same time, but then you can make use of these individual attributes to round as and when required. So after understanding this, we can check out a concept which is very simple called as pagination. So the question might be, what is pagination? Well, pagination is actually a very simple sequence of pages whenever we talk about a website, and all of these pages will have so there is a situation where most of the websites might not have many things that changes, right? So a web page will not differ a web page will not differ a lot from another web page in terms of all of the concepts. So there are certain concepts, where things remain to be the same. So to give you an example, think about an e-commerce site, right? So when you're browsing through all of the products, you have multiple pages where you can scroll through. You have multiple items on the same page, and then you have multiple pages which have exactly the same layout, but then the products are different, right? Page 1, page 2, page 3, and so on. So if you're wondering how this is done, well, the concept of pagination is used, and this in fact is very easily done by making use of CSS3 as well. So that elegance, that bit of making sure that your website looks structured and the web page does not differ much from the other web pages, but then the products differ, of course, this can be easily implemented by making use of pagination. With this, we can check out the 22nd question that says, what are the components of the CSS box model? Well, the CSS has very important components, and the box model is the foundation, and the box model is the foundational aspect of CSS. So it is very vital that you understand the box model, because that is the very important entity that encloses all of the HTML content, either as a box element or a button element as well. And to do this, it has been governed by 4 very important it has been governed by 4 very important components. One is border, we have content, margin, and padding. Make sure to mention all 4 of these components, as each of them have their own usages. For example, border will actually denote the padding and the content around the border. Then content refers to the actual content, of course, and then you have the margin refers to all the top layer of the box element and the designs associated with that. And then we have padding is a concept where we talk about the empty spaces or the negative spaces in between the elements that are present that have to be styled as well. So make sure to mention all 4 components. With this, we come to the 23rd question that states, what are some of the properties of transitions in CSS3? Well, transitions in CSS3 are very simple to use, and they will give you the ability to rapidly do a lot of things with a small amount of code. Let's say, for example, if you have to add animation effects or anything of that sort, you can make use of transitions to do it in a very simple way. Whenever we talk about the properties of transitions, there's four main properties that you have to mention. One is the transition delay, the transition duration, the transition property, and the timing function. And each of these, as the name suggests, have their own niche usages, where delay will control the actual delay of movement of an entity, the duration will talk about the duration of display, the property will talk about the effect that you want to achieve, and of course we have the timing function as well. So these four properties have their own unique aspects whenever we have to think about making use of transitions, let's say to add very simple animations in CSS3. Now with this, we can check out the 24th question that says, what is the use of pseudo classes in CSS? Pseudo classes, again, even though it sounds like a class, it is actually a technique that we have to talk about in CSS. And pseudo classes are used to change the style of all of the elements, whenever we have one element that has to change its state. So whenever there is an element that changes its state, and if we have to change the styling after this element changes state, pseudo classes are very widely used. So there's a good chance you've already come across this. For example, there is a style change when you move the mouse over an element. The mouse color might change, the button color might change. You might have animations when you move out of focus, or let's say if you have external links, then you can add a styling to that. You can change the color of it as soon as the mouse moves on it, and there is so many things, right? So the application of pseudo classes, especially in CSS, is immeasurable, because there's a lot of things, and your imagination is the only barrier here. And then pseudo classes are of course widely used just for their aesthetic abilities as well. Now, after understanding this, we can check out the 25th question that states, what is the use of media queries? Well, media queries, again, as the name suggests, will give you the ability in which you can design an RWD, a responsive web design, where you can adjust a lot of entities which have been styled based on their shapes, sizes, and a lot of things. So they are mostly used to adjust a lot of entities, such as the height of viewing, then you have the width, then you have the viewport. The viewport is very important for rendering and showing to the users. Then you have the resolution, you have the orientation, and so many things, right? So to adjust all of these and to define styles for these in CSS, well, media queries are made use of this. And the good thing is that they help a lot whenever you're talking about responsive web designing as well. So that's a win-win for both efficiency and looks. Now with this, we can come to the 26th question that says, why is float used in CSS? Float is again a very important property. In fact, it's a property that's used a lot in CSS because it gives you the ability to easily control the positioning of an element, or let's say even if you have to change the layout and control the layout, it can be done in a very simple way by making use of float. So if you're talking about placing any element on a web page, then think about this. The simple example shown on your screen, we have the div, and then we're talking about float to the right. So whatever the content that you're styling out here, right? So all of the content of that particular div class will be made sure to placed on the right side of the screen, because you have specifically mentioned in the floating attribute that you want it towards the right. You can have it to the left, you can have it to the center, and a lot of other options as well. So based on this, you can easily move around objects in screen by making use of float in CSS. So moving on to the next question, it says, what is a z-index in CSS or z-index? Well, z-index, again, if you can already think about it, it's actually a property in CSS where we try to define an order of elements using this particular index as a measure in any sort of web page designing, because the working of z-index is very simple. It works on the basis of ordered indices. So let's say if there is a higher ordered element that has to be So let's say if there's a higher ordered element that has to be shown and that has to render before a lower ordered element, then z-index will give that element the property where it will denote the order of execution as well. And then one very important thing that you have to mention to the interviewer about making use of z-index is that z-index will only apply if your elements are positioned. What does this mean? Well, this means that these elements must have the position attribute compulsorily if you have to make use of z-index. So without the position attribute, z-index will not work for that particular styling entity there. So make sure to mention that as well. So with this, we can check out the 28th question that says, why are external style sheets preferred, right? So we saw inline, external, and embedded in a previous question. So why are external style sheets the most popular ones out there right now? It provides many benefits, and I've mentioned the top 3 benefits that they offer. With an external style sheet, you can make use of the classes any number of times that you desire, be it 1 times, 10 times, 100 times. You can make use of it without much effort as well. This has to be the biggest benefit of making use of external style sheets. And then with an external style sheet, and with an external style sheets, what's actually happening is that it will give you the style control of multiple documents, right? So you can have one CSS file and map it across multiple documents for styling requirement as well. So it simplifies the plethora of files that goes into building a good website as well. Be it the use of groupings, be the use of groupings or selectors. All of these can be used in a very simple fashion in a single file, in fact, to apply styles across a variety of files, across a variety of HTML elements in the entire website. So external style sheets are a win-win in terms of efficiency, win-win in terms of ease of use, and a win in terms of making use of reusable concepts as well. So with this, we can check out the 29th question that says, what is the meaning of long polling in web development? So when we have to talk about long polling, you have to understand one thing is that long polling is actually a developmental pattern that we make use whenever we have to, let's say, simulate a data push operation from a server to a client machine. So let's say if there is some data that has to be moved from the server to a client machine, long polling is actually the development pattern that is used. So what happens when long polling is used, right? So when long polling is actually operational, the client will send in a request to the server saying, hey, I am available, I am polling to you, so now you can send the data. So what happens is server accepts the poll, and then it can push all the data from the server to the client. And once the data is actually transferred, there will be a timeout attribute that denotes the connection end, and of course the connection will end based upon that. And after so the connection will end based upon after the data has been sent to the client, or if there is a manual timeout that is provided. So whatever occurs first, either the completion of data sending or the occurrence of the timeout criteria, the entire connection will drop out as is. So long polling is a very simple concept to emulate data push operations from servers and clients, as you just saw. So make sure to mention all these points. Now with this, we can check out the 30th question that says, what are some of the web development technologies that you know? Well, you might not have to wait until the 30th question actually to get to this point in an actual interview, but then an interviewer can start out with this being your first question as well. So it's an extremely common question, and there's a very good chance that it is always asked too. So one very important thing that you have to remember here is that answer this based on your learning, your experience, whatever you have taken in terms of knowledge, be it in a certification program, be it self-learning, or whatever you have done. Make sure to answer it based on that. But then, of course, to give you a good clarity about what a good web developer will have, what skills the web developers will have, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, SQL, Python, PHP, frameworks of PHP such as Laravel, Cake PHP. There's a lot of things. The list can go on and on if you're talking about what a good web developer should know. But then at this point of time, if you do not have all of the skills that are shown on your screen, well, fear not, because most of the time you will be concentrating on at least 3 or 4 of these maximum. So you really do not have to worry about it unless you're looking at full stack development. In that particular case, a good amount of proficiency is required in all of these. So with this, we can check out the 31st question. So the 31st question states, what is the difference between cookies and local storage? In terms of web development terminologies, cookies are actually data that is accessible both to the client and the server, while local storage is only available when we talk about the client side machine as well. And as you already might know, cookies have what we call as an expiry time, and all of the data that's stored in that cookie will get deleted after expiry. And there is no concept of expiry when we talk about local storage, and how the data can be manually deleted rather than having it automatically drop as well, because of the presence of no expiration too. So this very subtle difference that lies in between cookies and local storage are very important in the entire working in the field of web development. So make sure to mention these 2 points to the interviewer as well. Now, coming to the 32nd question, it says, what is the difference between XHTML and HTML? Well, there are many differences we can talk about XHTML and HTML, and we can have another separate video just for this. But then to make sure that you optimally answer this question, here are the three very important differences that you should mention. HTML, first of all, is not a case-sensitive language, while XHTML is a case-sensitive language. So whenever you make use of HTML tags, in the case of XHTML, all the tags must compulsorily be in the lowercase, and that is not the case when we talk about HTML. And in XHTML, the tags should be compulsorily closed. There should be no open-ended tags. It is not allowed as per the syntax. But then HTML can have open-ended tags, and it'll work fine if there are no other ambiguities as well. And then when we talk about attributes always have to be put in double quotes in XHTML, and attributes in regular HTML does not require the compulsory use of quotation marks as well. So even without that, it'll perform well. So this forms to be the very simple difference that lies in between how strict the syntax is when we talk about XHTML versus the regular HTML. So make sure to mention these to the interviewer. So with this, we can come to the 33rd question that states, what are the various data types that are present in JavaScript? JavaScript has 7 main types of data that we talk about. It is very important to mention, and it is very important that you mention all of these as well. So we have Boolean, which talks about true or false, and we have the number data type, we have the object itself is a data type, then we have undefined, we have null, yes, null is a data type, and then we have string, we have functions, and much more. So it is very vital that you know at least the basic functioning of each of these data types, and instead of just mentioning it out, just like any other answer which has a list attached to it, make sure to explain 1 or 2 sentences about each of these. So that will add a lot of value to your candidature, and it will impress the interviewer, giving them an aspect of knowing that you have an idea about all of these concepts in depth as well. So mention 1 or 2 sentences and it will help you a lot. Now with this, we can come to the 34th question that states, how can styles or classes be changed in elements when we're making use of JavaScript? So how can styles be changed or classes be changed, right? So to do this, we make use of two very important to do this, we can actually use two very So this can be done in JavaScript in a very simple way. So modifying classes or modifying styles of any element is not much of a task at all. To modify the styles, we're going to make use of style.fontSize. If you have to add in, the font size, then if you have to modify the classes, we just give the class name instead of dot style. So instead of dot style, we have the dot class name, and then of course we do have to, provide the name of the class there. But then when you think about it, there is no much difference between the syntax. It's just very subtle, but then both of these easily will allow you to change styles or classes based on the requirement by making use of JavaScript in an easy way. With this, we can check out the 35th question that states, what are the types of pop-up boxes that are present in JavaScript? So, we've all seen very good looking dialog boxes whenever we go onto a website. So there are actually types of dialog boxes that you're supposed to know. There's 3 main types of dialog boxes. In fact, whenever we work with JavaScript, one is the alert box, one is the confirm box, and there's another box called as the prompt box. So with an alert box, a message is displayed on the screen. There'll be a message and an OK button. It's like telling you, hey, here is something, which can either be going right or going wrong, and it's displaying it to you. It's conveying it in a sentence. Now, when we talk about the confirm dialog box, here the users will have the ability to either say OK or cancel it, and you can make a decision based on this. So a decision can be easily made by making use of the confirm box. Then we have something called as a prompt box. A prompt box is where you will have to input something, say such as your user ID, your email ID or password, and then you'll have the OK buttons, the cancel buttons, or the login button. That's very simple. So that's it. So that's a very simple example of making use of a prompt button. So make sure to mention all these 3 types of dialog boxes when you ask this question. It's the alert box, it's the confirm box, and it's the prompt box. And this concept, in fact, as you've already seen, is very simple to remember as well. So being confounded or being confused is not an option here. Is not an option here in terms of web development, because all these concepts are highly readable and they offer easy to look at and work with syntax as well. Now with this, we can come to the 36th question that says, what is the difference between window on load and on document ready? Well, both of these are very widely used events when we talk about CSS and the usage of images as well. So what happens in window.onload is that this is an event that is not called until the page is completely loaded, right? So all of your images, all of your CSS styling, everything has to be loaded. Only then the window.onload event is called, and what that event does is it will add a little bit of a delay whenever there is a rendering of a web page that's required. So if you have to manually have a delay, you're going to make use of this. But then if you have to remove a delay, we make use of something called as on document ready. So when we're making use of on document ready, this particular event will wait only till your DOM is initialized. It will not wait until your entire website is initialized. And as soon as your DOM is ready, it will begin all of the things that is required to be done under that particular event action. So this will reduce the delay, while window.onload will add a tiny bit of delay while rendering as well. So this forms to be the basic difference that lies between window.onload and on document ready. And now, when we're talking about the type conversion and how type conversion is handled in JavaScript as well, there could be a question, that's very important that can be asked in terms of JavaScript, which is how is type conversion handled here? Well, this could be a slightly tricky question in case if you're thinking about taking the manual approach, because JavaScript is a weakly typed language. With a weakly typed language and its ability to handle automatic type conversion, you can just pass any function as an argument to any other function without having to do anything else. So with this simple usage, there's no errors, there is no data associated warnings or anything else that might pop up, as all the values will directly get converted into the data type without you having to do anything. So it all gets converted automatically, and with the ability of JavaScript being weakly typed, the automatic type conversion is one of the things that will help a lot whenever you're programming in JavaScript as well. So make sure to mention how type conversion is handled in JavaScript. So with this, we move on to the 38th question that states, what is the meaning of scope of a variable in JavaScript, right? So I'm sure you already know this, but then explain the types as well. So scope will refer to the access of functions and variables in a running environment. So, you can have multiple variables, but then not all the concepts in your program can have access to these variables. So you can change these programming scopes where you're providing variables or other entities certain access but then you can stop other entities having access to these variables as well. So this is the important part. Make sure to talk about the two types of scope. One is the local scope and the other one is the global scope. If you're talking about a variable or a function or a value or anything that's in the local scope, that means that all the values are actually in the same function. The values can be accessed, the values, everything can be done within that particular function just because of its local scope, and all the values cannot be accessed outside it. So it's like think about a plastic cover. So think about a cover where you've put in certain clothes or anything, right? So you cannot have access to this unless you have access to the cover itself. That's a very good example of local scope. And then when you talk about global scope is like global scope is a very simple concept, exact opposite to that of local scope. So instead of having a cover, just have it have your clothes on an open basket, so anyone can have access to it, right? So exactly the same concept here as well. So variables, if they are declared as global, they can be accessed from anywhere in the application throughout without having limited scope or limited access as well. So this is one very important concept, and these have their own niche use cases, either local scope or global scope. They have their own use cases, and most of the time it is only spoken in terms of security, access methodologies, and a lot more. So make sure to mention all of these when you ask this question. Now with this, we can move on to the 39th question that states, how are comments used in JavaScript? So again, this is again a very simple question. When we talk about comments in JavaScript, there are actually two types of comments. We have the single line comment, where your comment is just one line, and then we have multi-line comments where your comment is a multi-line comment, where your comment actually lasts for more than one line with a line break in between. So to make use of the single line comment, we make use of double slashes and just we type whatever comment we require. But then if you are making use of a multi-line comment, we make use of a slash and an asterisk to begin the comment. Then of course we type the actual comment in multiple lines, and then we close it in the exact opposite order, which is the asterisk and the asterisk and the slash. So make sure to take a quick note of the syntax in terms of using single line comments and making use of multi-line comments, as well as it is very vital that you know this subtle difference that exists. Now, after understanding comments, we're going to check out a quick concept with the 40th question that is called as undefined and undeclared variables. So what are these variables that are undefined? What are these variables that are undeclared when we talk about JavaScript? As the name suggests, if you have to talk about undefined variables, these are variables that are already declared. These are variables that are already specifically mentioned to the compiler to understand, but then we have not initialized it. We have not provided it with any value. We're just told that the variable exists, but then we have not provided it any value or instantiated it or initialized it anyway. So that is an undefined variable. But then if you have to talk about the variables called as undeclared variables are variables say that are already being used in the program without it being declared. So in that case, if you have not declared a variable but then you're still making use of it, that becomes an undeclared variable. Check out the example on your screen. We have the alert.undef where we're talking about the undefined variable. You can see the use of a comment as well. And then we're talking about not declared. This is an alert that can be set to act in case if there is an access for an undeclared variable in that particular program. So the subtle difference that lies between having a variable which is undefined or having a variable which is undeclared is very important for you to understand as well as convey it to the interviewer too. So with this, we can move on to the 41st question that states, what is the method used to submit forms in JavaScript? Well, this is a very simple question, very straightforward question, but then sometimes you might get it wrong. So make sure to concentrate. Forms can very easily be submitted in case of JavaScript, and all you have to do is use one single method, and that method is forms.submit. So document.forms.0.submit that you see on your screen right now, in case if you're wondering what the 0 stands for, the 0 actually talks about the index of that particular form as well. If there's multiple indices, then of course multiple indices are used apart from 0 here as well. So document.forms.0.submit will help you submit any form in JavaScript in a very simple and an easy fashion. With this, we can come to the 42nd question that says, why is this keyword used a lot in JavaScript? I'm sure you've come across the keyword this, and in fact, you might have used it a lot as well. So do you know why it is used a lot? Well, one very important thing is that it is primarily used to access the current object that is present in the program. So whenever you're working with the program, it will let you access the current object. So this object might be residing inside a method, and the keyword that is used, whenever we're talking about that particular variable or whenever we're talking about that particular object, makes it very easy to access as well. So this keyword will provide us access inside a method, and it'll help us in referencing all of the variables or the objects that exist in that particular methodology too. So after understanding this, we can check out the 43rd question that says, what is the use of the differ attribute in JavaScript? Again, the differ attribute is widely used because it is primarily used as a Boolean type attribute, right? So you already know Boolean. Boolean is 1 or 0 or true or false. So but then why do we use it as differ, right? So differ is primarily used to delay the execution of any sort of JavaScript code on the web page. We will manually halt the execution of JavaScript code until everything else initializes. For example, your HTML entities can completely initialize, your CSS element can completely initialize, your parser can be ready, your DOM can be ready, and after all of this is done, then we can make sure that your JavaScript code executes after all of this. So to add that tiny point of delay to wait for all the other components to be done, well, differ is used just for that. A simple example is shown on your screen just to use this. One very important thing is that whenever you're talking about attributes and concepts in JavaScript, wherever possible, please do use an example while explaining as well. So that will add a lot of value to your candidature. Now, when we talk about their particular firm or a question that's related to them, it can be like, how can you prioritize SEO, manageability, maintainability, performance, security, etc. in a web application? So what gets priority, right? So this can be a very confusing question to begin with, because you might not know what you have to prioritize for that company, but then there is a certain standard that is set. The interviewer is asking you this tricky question to check if you have the ability to understand the working environment that you're applying for, right? So in case if it's a small startup, then you have to answer it in a different way. But then if it's a very large corporation or a mid-sized firm, you have to answer this in a very different way. See, if it's a very large firm that you're applying for, of course, data security will get the highest priority over SEO. So this is one common practice that has been used for the last couple of years. But then if you're talking about, let's say, a publication firm, let's say, or a small size firm, firm that's into publication a lot, then of course SEO will get the preference over security. So to answer this question very well, you can do one simple task beforehand. Even before attending the interview, just read a little bit about the company that you're applying for. This way you can have a clear understanding of what priority you would like to talk about when you ask this question, because this is again a very important question. It's very frequently asked, and if you can answer this without taking a lot of time or without putting an effort while being asked, then the interviewer will get a clear picture of how you've put in your effort to understand about the firm as well, and not just prepared for the interview. That will help you immensely. So make sure to prepare for this question very well. Now with this, we can check out the 45th question that states, what is the result if a jQuery handler or a jQuery event handler returns a false? Well, what happens when a jQuery event handler returns false? It's very simple. If your jQuery event handler returns a false, which is a boolean value, it means that the event will not execute any further. Your event is halted at that particular point of time, and whatever actions were given after that will be skipped. But then whatever actions were there before that, of course, would have executed. Only then the event handler will return the boolean false. Whatever is after the boolean false, just as I stated, will be omitted. So this is again a very straightforward question with a very simple example. So again, this is a very straightforward question with a very simple answer. Now, we can move on to the 46th question that states, what is the use of the each function in jQuery, right? So the each function is again a very important function. In fact, it is the most used function whenever you're working with jQuery. So what this each function does is that it provides the users with the ability to move across all of these elements in an iterative pattern. So if you have a set of elements, if you have multiple elements that you have to work with, you can move across them one after the other by making use of each element. So, there's a simple function that gets passed onto the each element, and then this will result in the execution of each of the events for which the object have been called. So make sure you read that last line again, because we're stating that whenever a function is passed to the each method, right, this will result in the execution of all of the events for which the actual object has been called. So to iterate over it, we have to call it first, a function has to be passed, and then eventually we can have access to all the data that's present there as well. So again, a simple question and a straightforward answer. So moving on, 47th question states, what is pair programming? Pair programming is one very, very important thing that you have to understand, especially in web development, because not all of the time you are working on a solo project, right? If your project is very big, you will of course have lots of colleagues in your web development team that you'll be working with to solve whatever problem that you have at hand. So pair programming, as the name suggests, in fact, will check your ability to see if you can work very easily with other colleagues. So how easily is your interpersonal skills, and how effectively can you collaborate with other people in a fast-paced environment, be it an agile development platform, whatever it is. But then if the scenario is actually about fast-paced development, then most of the time agile will not fit that particular situation clearly. So pair programming is something that is used for fast-paced development and collaborative development. So it is very vital that you know this. So after this, we can check out the 48th question that says, what is the use of the dollar function in jQuery? So the dollar function is again a very simple function. It's again very widely used. It is used basically as a wrapper to wrap around every other object, if we are talking about their jQuery counterparts as well. But then why do we have to wrap around objects, right? So this function is used to wrap because this will give the users the ability to call any method of their choice. If it is defined as a jQuery object previously, you can call it and you can work with it without having to put much effort there as well. So that's very important. And here is one more thing that you have to understand, is that selectors can be also passed to the dollar function. So what happens if we pass a selector to a dollar function is that the result is the output of the jQuery object where this is the important part, where it contains the matched DOM element. So if you want the output of the jQuery object to be a matched DOM element, or to output you that particular requirement, then of course selectors are passed onto the dollar function to do just this. Now with this, we can check out the 49th question that states, what are the types of CDNs that are supported in jQuery? CDNs, I'm sure you already know about it. It's content delivery networks. And primarily when we talk about making use of jQuery, there are two types of CDNs. One's from Microsoft and one's the Google CDN. So the Microsoft CDN is to use So the Microsoft CDN is used to load all the jQuery, Ajax, CDN libraries and files and whatever is required for that. But then when we talk about Google, we use Google to load the jQuery from the native APIs, what we call as the Google Libraries APIs that are already present, and work with them at the same time as well. So there are two widely used CDNs with jQuery. There are Google and they are Microsoft. One talks about Ajax CDN when we talk about Microsoft, and then when we talk about Google, we'll be loading the jQuery from the Google Libraries API. Now with this, we come to the last question that says, have you earned any sort of certification to improve your learning and implementation process? Well, this is a very important question, and as you might have already known, a certification program will add a lot of value to your candidature in any sort of technological company job role that you're applying for. Be it if you're a fresher, be it if you're an intermediate user, or if you're an advanced user moving from one programming language or concept to another, a certification program will help you a lot. Because apart from the usual concept where you have a lot of knowledge in you, you would have been proficient in a lot of concept, you would have been expert in using it, you would have had let's say real life project use cases and whatnot to work with. But then what the other thing you have to talk about here is how you're impressing the interviewer, because the interviewer will be looking at your ability to learn new things, you showing aspiration to actually learn it, or in fact you making use of web development as a career path in a very serious way. And this shows that you're an effective learner as well. If you've learned it on your own, or if you've learned it on a certification program, whatever it is, you're just showing a lot of girth and potential to the interviewer as well. So my suggestion to answer this question is to make sure that you answer about how you have made use of the certification program rather than the actual program itself. Because you might have one or more certification programs, but what will add value to the interviewer is if you convey to them what you have done. So what is the result of you picking up that certification program? What have you learned there? What have you implemented there? And what problems have you solved there? That is what they are after, and that is what they are looking for in this question as well. So make sure to answer about that. Explain about what you learned, how you implemented new things, how you learned it, how it's helpful to you so far as well. Here's a small bonus you can use as well. Apart from all of these, talk about how you plan to use this learning to their firm's advantage as well. So state 1 or 2 points where you can talk about how you will bring the upper hand to the table and how you would want to implement your learning with their company, and that will impress the interviewer as well. So with this, you have come to the end of the top 50 web development questions, interview questions and answers. So I take this opportunity to wish you all the very best for all of the upcoming interviews, and I'm sure you've got a very clear picture now on how to approach questions and how to attack these answers in a concise and a precise manner. So with this, I'll see you on the next one.